8 things I ditched moving to Sweden from the United States. Hey everyone, Brennan here. I am board certified nurse practitioner and certified diabetes care educator who moved from Texas to Sweden over 4 years ago, and I've been living and working here ever since. If you want to see some of my other content that addresses what it's been like for me moving to this country and what I had to go through and my personal experiences, and the most often question I get, which is, why did you move to Sweden? Make sure and check out my other content. That being said, let's get to the video. So top 8 things that I had to ditch moving to Sweden. Now, I wouldn't say that, that's kind of clickbaity. It's not that I had to ditch them, and some of these things I haven't completely ditched, but I pretty much have made some major lifestyle changes in these areas since moving to Sweden. First off is air conditioning. So coming from Texas, it was not unusual to have weather of 47 degrees Celsius with 80% humidity in the summertime. It's very dangerous in Texas to be outside, and it is very miserable if you don't have air conditioning. In fact, people do die in the summers in Texas because it gets so hot. And in fact, my father was one of those. He passed away in the summer last year, and it was in the 40 plus degrees with 80% humidity. So it is quite dangerous, and you really have to have the air conditioning. When I first moved to Sweden, I was so used to the way the air felt with an air conditioner running. We had it on full blast in the car. You had it really cold in the hospital where I worked at. You had it cold in all the stores and the restaurants. You had it cold at home. And then in the wintertime, we had a central heating system, which was pretty common. We did have a fireplace at my parents' house, but I didn't have a fireplace at my house where I lived. And so the interesting thing is that usually in the wintertime, I always felt like the heating systems didn't work as good as here in Sweden, but the air conditioning systems worked pretty good. Now, coming to Sweden, the summers are quite mild compared to the States. It can get pretty warm in the area I'm in. I'm in the very bottom of Sweden. I live in the greater metropolitan area just outside of Malmö. And it can get up to, in the mid 30s Celsius. That is not real common. The summer's actually been quite cold and mild and pleasant. That being said, it is pretty humid in the summertime. And when I first moved to Sweden, I had a really hard time adapting the first summer. It was a really hot summer. It was hotter than usual. Also, the apartment that I lived in, it was a bit away from the seaside, and so it felt like the air was very stagnant in the summertime and quite humid. And so even though it'd be 70 or 80 degrees, the sun is up longer in the summertime, and so it's like it takes longer for your house to cool down, and it just kind of holds in that heat. And so I had a really hard time sleeping at night because I just was used to sleeping with an air conditioner. And so I bought me a portable air conditioner just so I could sleep at night and feel good. And the interesting thing is after I bought it, I used it that summer, and I used it maybe like 1 or 2 days the summer after that, and I've never used it since. I still have it. I keep thinking I should sell it. But the reality is if I sell it, we may end up getting one of those heat waves and end up needing to use it. So I've been hanging on to it, but yeah, I pretty much ditched air conditioning. The car, when I'm driving in it, if it's been sitting in the sun when I come out of work, then I will have to turn the AC on for a little bit just to cool down the inside of the car. But I usually, if it's not raining in the summertime, I'm driving with the windows down, which is quite nice. The second thing that I ditched was paying with cash. When I first moved to Sweden, there was kind of a shock to me, and that was almost no one took cash. There were some exceptions. Grocery stores, most of them would take cash. They may not always have exact change for you, but that was a big challenge for me because coming here, I did not have what's called a personal identification number, which is the Swedish version of a tax ID number, kind of like Social Security number in America. And if you don't have that, you cannot get your hands on a proper bank account with all the functions of a proper bank account, and you can't get set up with a thing that's called Swish here. So in America, there's so many different electronic ways to pay. You've got, if your friends pay for something and they're like, just give me the money, or, you buy something from someone and they want you to electronically send it. It's like, okay, what do you have for an app? Do you have Zelle, Apple Pay, Cash Pay, Venmo? There's a whole slew of different ways that you can send money. Whereas here in Sweden, the typical way that someone pays is with a thing called Swish. And then going to the grocery store now, I have a bank account. Once I got a tax ID number, it took me 2 years to get that. And I've done content on that, so you can check out that content. But it was a nightmare getting a tax ID number here. But once you get set up in the system, it works really good. I really enjoy the convenience of not having to carry cash with me. I've been informed that a huge reason for them not using cash was for security reasons, and it reduces the chances of being burglarized or, someone trying to take your money. And there is a little concern I have about that, though, and that is if the system were to go down, say there's a giant solar flare, or if we're hacked here by some other country in a time of war, then what happens? And I don't know if there's a easy answer for that, but I will say that I have been told by many Swedes that it's good to have about 2,000 kroner, or about $200 in savings in cash at your house for emergencies, which I think is good. So I do try to make sure that I've got a little bit on hand just in case, but I really don't remember the last time I paid for cash. I will say there are some people that only want cash, and it's usually people that cut your hair. There aren't a lot of places where they, prefer cash. I had an old gentleman out in the middle of nowhere who he had set up like a little coffee stand at his house. And I mean, there was nothing out there in the middle of nowhere. And he's like maybe 85 years old selling apple pie and coffee. And so there was really only two ways to pay, and it was Swish or he would take cash. So there is the occasional time where cash is accepted, but for the most part, it's been done away with here. And I would say I think it's pretty cool. I just had that one caveat, and that is if something were to go wrong with the system, then what's going to happen? Third thing is buying clothes. So in the States, it is so easy to go shopping. I will say also, as a nurse, my salary was 2.5 times higher than my salary here in Sweden. Taxes are higher here too, and everything you buy is taxed. So it's like tax on tax on tax. So you have to make every single dollar count. Whereas in the States, as a nurse, I had quite a bit of disposable income. I actually had, a house. I had a nice Acura car, and I went shopping. Now, one of the pastimes of a lot of people, you've probably seen the movies, if you watch American movies, is people going shopping. And that was not unusual, especially when I was younger, to go with my friends and go to the mall and go buying clothes and things like that. Now, I was not one of those that was like, would buy, a $40 or $50 pair of jeans. I never did that. I would always go to the back of the store, look in the sale area, and see kind of like was from the last season that was, you had to kind of pick through everything and find your size. They didn't always have your size. But I'm like, oh, okay, here's some jeans, and they're like half price, $20, whatever. And that led to me having a whole lot of clothes that didn't get used, and you end up outgrowing them, and then you hang on to them, and you're like, well, one day I'll lose weight, and then I can wear that again. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I was wearing like a size extra small, and now I'm wearing a large t-shirt, gone from extra small t-shirt to a large t-shirt. And even that's starting to get a little tight, and I kept telling myself, I will never wear more than a large t-shirt. But I hung on to a lot of those shirts thinking, oh, I'm going to lose weight. Now, I've been going to the gym and stuff, so we'll see how long I'm able to hold off on buying clothes, because I've noticed, my shape is changing a bit, mostly in the shoulders. And so I'm finding the shirts are getting a little bit tight. But that's kind of my goal, is trying not to buy so many clothes. And I feel like it's easier to do that now. I don't remember the last thing I bought here in Sweden. Usually what I do is when I go to the States, there are some things that I usually purchase because I can get them cheaper, like usually just like socks and underwear, maybe one or two t-shirts. I think that's all I bought last time I went to the States. But my plan is try to use what I have, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. That's fine. And just try to take real good care of the stuff that I have. Fourth thing is going to the movies. So it's really weird. In the States, especially in Texas, going to the movies is like a big deal. It always has been since I was younger. I think a lot of things have changed because, I moved here towards the end of COVID. I came here, like I said, 2021, in the middle of 2021. And during that time, you started seeing a whole lot of people really getting into streaming video content at home rather than going to movie theaters because of the social distancing and staying at home rules and things of that nature. I don't know how it is now. Up to till COVID, I mean, going to the movies is a big deal. So where I came from, because I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's really hot and we don't really have like a lot of nature where I'm at. Kind of like here in Sweden, you have a lot of outdoor type activities. If it's, 115 degrees outside in the middle of the summer, then what are you going to do for fun with your friends? Well, usually, go shopping or you go to the movies, or you go out and eat, or you go to maybe to, a pub or have some beers or something like that. That's usually the things that you do. And I do enjoy those things. But coming to Sweden, I feel like the vibe is a little different. I have never been invited to go to the movies since I've moved here to Sweden. We do have movie theaters here, but I live by myself, and I do a lot of, like, I have Netflix and I have Apple TV and several other things. So it's kind of like I haven't really felt like compelled to go to the movies. And I'm one of those, I feel weird going to like a theater by myself. That has been, I guess it's a good thing because I'm saving money, because going to the movies is not a cheap thing either nowadays. When I was a little kid, like I said, money was really tight. And so sometimes my parents would scrounge up enough money together and we would go to what was called a dollar movie. So it was like just $1 for each of us. And it was, kind of a hole in the wall theater, but it was like an excuse to get out of the house and do something as a family, and then you could buy popcorn for $1. So, now, I mean, you couldn't even, for what we spent for a whole family going to like a dollar movie, you couldn't do that for one person. And so it's just a really expensive thing. I still enjoy the idea of going to the movie theater. I haven't consciously said to myself, okay, I'm not going to go to the movies. It's just kind of something that has just happened. Fifth thing that I've ditched is skin medications. So before coming to Sweden, I had a lot of health problems. And I think a lot of it came from the additives they put in the water. Where I came from, I was told there was like 37 different chemicals that were put in the drinking water to make it safe. One of the differences of like water in Texas versus here in Sweden, a lot of the water actually comes from like a reservoir, and it gets very hot in the summertime. And so then you worry about like bacteria growing in it. A lot of the lake water is man-made lakes, whereas here in Sweden, you don't have as many people living here, and a lot of the water is very fresh. I actually really enjoy drinking the tap water here. It tastes pretty good, and it feels very clean. When I would take a shower in the States, I felt like I was taking an acid bath. After I would get done, my skin would just be burning and itching, and I had eczema, and I would break out, and I had like eczema in my scalp that would bleed when I would go out in the sun. I mean, it was horrible. And so I was like on steroid medications, and I was taking antihistamine pills. And I mean, it was just horrible, horrible, horrible. And then also the food, I noticed that I would have like allergic reactions to a lot of the food, because a lot of the food at some of the restaurants, like you can go out and shop your own food and cook your own stuff, and I didn't have a problem there. But I had a problem with like going out to eat. Mostly it was with fast food, not so much like at nicer restaurants. And coming to Sweden, my skin cleared up. Usually what I notice is when I go back to the States, because of the air pollution, the water pollution, and the food, I will flare up within usually 24 hours. I'll get my eczema back. And then when I come back to Sweden, it takes about a week for my skin to calm down. But I have not had any, I hear Swedes complain all the time in this area about allergies and headaches and stuff. And it's like, I have zero allergies in Sweden. Like my allergies went completely away. And I was that nerdy kid who's always like sneezing and has a box of tissues beside him, since I was like in school. And then like coming to Sweden, it's like, it's completely gone. It's crazy. And I'm definitely grateful for that. Sixth thing I ditched was watching behind my back. This is an interesting one. So you've probably seen some of the news out there that talks about, how there are these really dangerous no-go zones here in Sweden. But coming from Texas, compared to Texas, and Texas is actually pretty calm compared to some other parts of the United States, like some areas of New York or Chicago or some places in California. And so for me coming here, when people are talking about no-go zones and stuff, I've actually been to these places that they talk about, and I'm like, it's I don't want to, how shall I say this and package this right? I want to acknowledge that there is a change, and there's more criminality, there's more gun violence and things like that here in Sweden. And for a person who's only lived in Sweden and never lived anywhere else, that's going to be traumatizing and upsetting. But for someone coming from a place that has a whole lot more people, a lot more dense population in the big cities, cities that have nearly the same population as the entire country of Sweden crammed in, with a lot of diversity and more crime rates and gun violence and all this kind of stuff. It's like coming here, even in the rough areas, is like the rough areas were like paradise to me. And so I noticed that. So I lived alone most of my adult years, and I had literally nightmares when I would be at home by myself, because I was afraid that someone would break in my house and hurt me. I have been a victim of gun violence in the States, and I've lost friends that also worked in healthcare that were assaulted by people with either knives or guns. And I know of other people outside of work that have been hurt or killed with weapons. And so it's no wonder that I didn't feel safe. And so, if I was going to a parking garage by myself at nighttime, I'd be like watching my back. I'd had friends that got robbed at gunpoint and stuff in Fort Worth, Texas, where I came from. And then coming here, it's just like, my guard was up because I heard all these horrible things about certain areas, like here in Malmö, where I live. And, I've been to these places, I've been there at night, and at first my guard was up, but it's kind of like, you're still careful, right? But I don't feel like I'm watching my back all the time. And I noticed that moving to Sweden, I feel so safe. I have never had a nightmare about being hurt in my own home now. And I think it's because subconsciously my guard is not up like it was in the States. And I'm really grateful that that is something that I was able to ditch moving here to Sweden. Number 7 is another health issue: migraine headache medication. I used to get migraines all the time, and I think for a lot of the same reasons I was mentioning about the skin problems. I remember my first migraine that I had that I can recollect was when I was 8 or 9 years old. I was in 3rd grade, and I remember we were going to be doing a singing event at our school. And I had such a horrible migraine headache. I didn't know what it was, but I literally thought I was going to die. I thought my head was going to explode, and was crying. And I was telling the teacher I'm going to die, and I want my mom and all this kind of stuff. And she's just like, go sit down and we'll be done. And then you can go home. It's so funny, the mentality of schools in America versus schools here in Sweden, as I work with a lot of parents in my hospital that are nurses and doctors, and they'll get a call from the school at the slightest tummy ache or cough or sniffle, and the teacher's like, you need to come and drop your work and come pick up the kids now. Whereas in the States, the complete opposite. It's like, stop, being a baby, and, school will be over in an hour. Like, unless you've got like a fever or, you're bleeding or, broken arm or something, you're staying at school. It may be different these days now, but that was my experience. And so as an adult, I had migraines quite a bit. Both my mother and father have had a history of migraine headaches. My sister, too. It's a very common thing. I worked in a neurological ICU for a long time, and one of the neurologists I worked with, I was talking to her about it, and she said, well, you live in Texas, you're going to have migraines because of all the pollen and the fungus and the mold and things, just the nature that's there. Plus, then you got pollution. And then add to that, I had a lot of stress in my life as well. And so coming to Sweden, I rarely have a bad headache. I have not had to refill any of my migraine medications since coming here. If I get a bad headache, then, I can usually take Tylenol, ibuprofen. Kind of my go-to thing is a soda with caffeine plus ibuprofen. That seems to usually work, and then go take a nap. And then I'm good to go. And it's usually related to just being tired or stress or something like that. But in the States, I would just get these horrible, see flashing colors and stars. And, it was just, if you've had migraines, you know how bad they are. So I'm really grateful that's another thing I've been able to ditch is migraine medication. Number 8, I would say, is kind of a negative thing. And that is indulging myself in self-care. What do I mean by that? So, like I said earlier, as a nurse, you make a lot more money in the States. So I was making about 2.5 times as much money as I make here in Sweden. And then the taxes are lower, and I had great health insurance. My health insurance actually covered a lot of stuff that is not covered here in Sweden. So, for example, I had access to massage therapy. If I went to the chiropractor, I could get up to 20 treatments a year, and you would pay a copay each time, but it was relatively low. It was like, I think, $40 or $50. And then you could get like an hour massage after that. That was included with the chiropractic adjustment. I also got up to 20 treatments of acupuncture, and like, I don't even know anyone that, I know acupuncture exists here in Sweden, but it's like not a big thing like it is in the States. And in the States, it's pretty well regulated, and there's some really good acupuncturists. I had a fantastic acupuncturist. He was actually involved in helping get acupuncture paid for by insurance in the States. He was actually an MD from China, and then he later on decided to go back to school again and study acupuncture. So he kind of like did both. Really good guy. So I had that, and then getting massages, getting facials, going to the barber. What's interesting is, like I said, salaries are quite low here in Sweden, but the cost of things usually costs the same or more here. And so going to a barber costs me more here. Like if you go to one that's clean and actually like sterilizes the equipment, like going to a barbershop in the States is like very highly regulated, when it comes to clean standards. And I've seen a lot of barbershops here, a lot of the same barbershops that prefer that you pay in cash. And there will be like hair on the floor. They use the same clippers they use on one person, they use it on another person. The stuff's not being sterilized with alcohol, that sort of thing. And they're still charging the same or more than what you would have to pay in the States, and then your salaries are lower here. So going to a barber is like not a big thing for me anymore the way it used to be. I had several friends that were barbers, and so what I would do is I would treat myself like every 3 weeks and, pamper myself by getting my beard done and, haircut and all that kind of thing. I'm a very hairy dude, very embarrassing. I have always struggled with managing the hair that's going in places that I don't want it. I have a hairy back, hairy shoulders, hairy arms, hairy everywhere, short, hairy guy. And I also have autism, and so I'm very sensitive to texture. So I can feel like the pressure of like my shirt sitting on my back hair. And so it causes me a lot of discomfort. So in the States, I would get waxed like, every 4 to 6 weeks, I would go pay and get waxed. I can't afford it here. It actually costs more to do that here, and I just don't have the spare cash to do that. So I quit doing that. I would go get out to eat a whole lot more. Kind of my thing was over there, you get paid twice a month. And so I would reward myself by going and getting sushi at my favorite sushi place every 2 weeks when I would get my paycheck. Those things are luxury items here. I'm doing a lot more cooking at home. If I go out to eat, it's kind of a really special thing. And I don't usually go to like nicer restaurants. It's usually kind of like quick food that's cheaper and usually during lunchtime. So I would say that's probably a negative for me that I've had to ditch, but I'm adapting to it. I'm not complaining or anything. It's just an observation of that's just the way it is. I do find there are a lot of Swedes that do like to do those things, getting the hair done and stuff like that. And to be honest, if you're making the salary that I make, I'm not really sure how they afford it and then afford, like a decent place to live. I would assume the people that can do that, they've probably been living in Sweden for a long time and they've managed to pay everything off, and now that they've got spare money. But if you're like me, like an immigrant, for us immigrants to come here is very difficult. So a lot of these things that I'm saying about ditching may not actually apply to a person who's been living here for many years, or to a Swede that's grown up, lived here the whole life and come into the system. And a lot of these things may change for me in the future, after I'm set up and I got citizenship and I've got a house or an apartment or whatever paid for, I may be able to start doing some of these things again. But at least for now, for up to this point, the first 4 or so years I've been here, these are things that I've ended up ditching. Things like the air conditioning, that's not going to change. I'm grateful for, not having to be on migraine medication or skin medication. The cash thing, I'm kind of like, that's not really negative or positive, just curious about what's in the cards in the future if something ever happens like something that shuts the whole system down. But there are a few things that I do miss, and that's just the way it is. You will never find a perfect system. Every country has its pros and cons. And overall, I'm pretty content and happy to be here in Sweden. I'm very grateful to be here. Hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to like it if you did. And if you've got any things that you'd like to share about what's been like for you, maybe you've moved to Sweden as well, and there's some things that you had to ditch, or you moved to another country and you gave up some stuff. I would love to hear about it in the comments. Thanks, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Be good to yourself and to others. Take care.